and or nonprofits. So without any further ado, here is the basics of faith with Dr. Marty Hamilton. Marty, take it away.
Yeah, I'm Marty. This is the basics of faith. I'm going to interrupt our teaching a little bit today, and I got to tell you this story. This is amazing. I tell you what, every day I wake up, I'm truly amazed, not only in what God is doing, but just people in general. People in general just truly amaze me. So I'm coming into the studio this morning, and there's a major intersection here in town. And of course, we're sitting at a stoplight. And the guy up from me a little bit is a pickup or a big truck. And the passenger jumped out and started doing push-ups in the street there. I mean, I was just truly blown away. I couldn't believe that was happening. Anyway, we're going to break from Book of Exodus here for a little bit, but I do want to talk about religious movements. And I got some history here for it, and let's discuss it. So originally, my wife and I were from Kansas City on the Missouri side, and we've been down here in the Ozarks for about 30 years. And here not too long ago, I was just telling these guys we made a trip to Kansas City, like a little field trip. And usually whenever we go back to Kansas City, there's this one favorite spot we like to go to. I don't know if you ever heard of it, but it's by St. Catherine's Parish. It may be in the parish. And it's... St. Catherine's Parish, and it's called IHOP.
International House of Praise.
Yeah, prayer. International House of Prayer. Yeah, it's not for a restaurant. It's international.
24-hour worship, isn't it?
24/7. Well, at least every time I've been there. Pardon me?
Is that St. Louis or Kansas City?
Kansas City, South Kansas City. Yeah.
Go to that one of these days.
Yeah, it's truly amazing. I tell you what, whenever we go in there, I mean, it's like being in the house of God. It really is. I mean, you just feel it. Every time I've been there, they've got like somebody singing or a group singing or something. So I guess it's like that 24/7. Pretty amazing, I think. And so I'm going to tie something in here a little bit. We all know that Martin Luther, he started the Protestant Reformation, and he also started the Lutheran Church. I don't know that he started it, but his followers did, basically, because I think he remained Catholic. I know he got thrown out of the Catholic Church, but it may be in his mind. But anyway, on October 31st, which is Halloween, in 1517, Martin nailed the 95 Theses on the University of Wittenberg's chapel door. This began the Protestant movement, like I said, in the Lutheran Church. The Lutheran Church, in what they called the 30 Years' War, this sparked a pietist movement. And if you look at piety in Webster's, it says devotion to religious duties. Okay? And this was a movement. It was basically a movement of God. People wanted to be sanctified, set apart, things of that nature. And there was a guy by the name of Count Zinzendorf. His father died whenever he was young, and he had a lot of land, he was pretty much rich. And there was a bunch of different groups of these pietists around. They were different denominations, but they were still in this movement. And they were going to a place they had to hide from other people, because of wars and everything else. And so this Count Zinzendorf opened up his estate to them. Of course, like I said, we're different denominations, so they have different doctrines. So you get a bunch of people like that together, and usually they don't get along. So to squelch what was going on, Count Zinzendorf said, hey, let's do communion. So they did communion, and then they had a time of prayer. Well, this time of prayer, they say, lasted 100 years or better. And it went 24/7. In fact, they said they kept I read somewhere where they kept a fire going, okay, and for the 24/7. What came out of this was a whole bunch of missionaries, and they went everywhere. They went to the Indians. They, here in America, they went to America, of course, and went all over Europe, and I think they went to like South America and places like that. And so they were known as Moravians. These pietist movements that came out of Count Zinzendorf's estate there, they called them Moravians. If you read through history, you'll see where Moravians influenced a lot of people. Like I say, they influenced the Indians here in the United States. And so there's a sermon called Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God. And this was preached by Jonathan Edwards, and it was a little congregational church in Northampton, Massachusetts. This was in 1734. And because of this sermon, it sparked what they called an awakening. And 300 members of his church were converted. And in 1736, okay, 2 years later, an Anglican priest named John Wesley, he lived from 1703 to 1791. I like giving you the dates just so you get an idea of how long they lived. He lived 88 years, 87, 88, somewhere in there. Sailed to the United States, and he was in a really bad storm, okay? And he was amazed, kind of like me, he was amazed of how calm the Moravians were. They just sat there and sang psalms and things of that nature. They were cool all the way through this, and he's kind of panicking, because it's a bad storm. And so John left Georgia, and he went back to England. And 3 days before, John Wesley had what they call an Aldersgate street experience. Some people say it's whenever he got saved. Some people say, well, it's whenever he received the Holy Spirit. I don't know. But he had this experience, and it changed his life. Okay? And so John and Charles both went to this man by the name of Peter Bohler, B-O-H-L-E-R. And the O's got a little thing, a couple of dots over it. I don't know what that means. But anyway, pardon me?
Oh, okay. I thought it was lowercase, but that's not it.
Yeah, no, it had a couple of dots over the O, so I don't know how you say that. But anyway, and he was a Moravian. So not only did John Wesley get a dose of Moravians on the way over to Georgia, but whenever he came back, I don't know if he looked for him or what, but anyway, they met up again. This was 3 days before he had his Aldersgate street experience. So, you have to wonder, maybe he would have said something that sparked a change or conversion or whatever he went through. And so he had a friend, and John and Charles Wesley. Charles was known for doing like psalms and I guess he did a lot of hymns for the church, a bunch of them, my understanding. And so they had a friend, and this was another pietist, and his name was George Whitefield. He lived from 1714 to 1770, so he only lived, 56 years, something like that. They organized society within the Church of England, and they called them Holy Clubs. Whitefield was a Calvinist, okay, and we know that Calvinists believed in predestination. So he believed in predestination. He also would never come out and condemn slavery, where his friends, John and Charles Wesley, they were from what they called Arminianism, which means that people can reject the plan of salvation, and they also wanted to abolish slavery, so they were opposing people. And like I say, let's go through this a minute. So predestination means that way Dr. Paul says it is that you get saved whether you want to or not, okay? It's preordained and predestined. That's just the way it is. Where Arminianism, which is what the Methodists believe in, or is my understanding, is just the opposite of that you can reject God's salvation, and so it's not really predestined, if that makes sense to you. Anyway, what I do believe one of the reasons that Whitefield was a pietist, and over in Europe, like I say, pietism was a big deal as a movement, okay? Kind of like a revival that went through there. And one of the places was in Wales. And I believe it started in like northern Wales and then it spread to southern Wales. But the person that did the Welsh revival in 1739 was a man by the name of Hal Harris. And what was he? He was only like 59 years old, 1714 to 1773. And it's Hal Harris led a revival over in Wales. With this, Whitefield preached revival in the United States too. And this seems hard to believe. You got like 13 colonies in the United States, right? And he was able to go back then and preach to like 80% of the colonists. The deal about Whitefield, they say, is that he had a booming voice. I mean, you could almost hear him from like miles away. And, you know, this was before they had, you know, speakers and audio equipment and things of that nature. And, I mean, it was amazing that he could have large crowds that would just fill the whole town. And it, like down in between the buildings, his voice would just echo down through these buildings where they could hear him. And like I say, he did 80% of the colonists, and like thousands of them started converting. And this is what they called the First Great Awakening in North America. And Europe had a revival due to Wesley's and a new denomination that they called Methodist. Okay? And which led to the United Methodist Church today, where a whole bunch of them grouped together and became one. And the reason it's called Methodist is because they went through things methodically. You know, they explained things and laid it all out for you, okay? That was the difference between, because actually, like I said, John Wesley was a Anglican priest. And I don't know that he ever gave that up. I don't know that he actually ever became a Methodist, but he started the Methodist movement, okay? And that's going to be important here. So if you got a first great awakening, eventually you're going to have a second great awakening, or they want to call it the first, right? So let's get this straight. The first great awakening was basically Jonathan Edwards, which George Whitefield kind of piled on, but he spread it a lot more, okay? Like I say, Jonathan Edwards was mainly just in Massachusetts, up in the Northeast. And, you know, Whitefield went to Georgia and every place else and spread it all around. Okay, the early 1800s, we're talking like 1801. Like I said, they didn't really have churches and stuff, so they'd go to big fields and they would spread the gospel that way, because to get that many people, you know, to hear them, they had what they called camp meetings. And besides camp meetings, they had what they called circuit riders. So like a minister would he'd have a rotation where he went to different places to meet people and show them the different sermons and things of that nature. And it was just like a pre-planned deal. It's kind of like doctors used to go do house calls. You know, it's basically the same difference. And these were called the circuit riders, and they have these camp meetings. So this led to the Second Great Awakening. And so you got the president of Yale, which is called, his name was Timothy Dwight. and a congregational slash Presbyterian minister named Lyman Beecher joined a Presbyterian, James McGreedy, and then he had a Methodist circuit rider, Peter Cartwright. So they all met up in Cane Ridge, Kentucky for one of these big camp meetings. And this is what led to the Second Great Awakening. And a lot of your known preachers came out of that. I mean, we're talking Charles Finney, Dwight Moody. On the England side, you know, you had Spurgeon. I mean, all your great ministers back then basically came out of this Second Great Awakening. And so there was a couple. One was, he was what they called an ex-Baptist. I guess he was Baptist, but he kind of switched out. And his name was Alexander Campbell, joined up with Barton Stone to try to unite Christians based on the Bible. They used just the Bible as their guide, and that's what they decided was going to unite all these different denominations. So basically, they had a good idea, but it didn't really work, because out of that came the churches of Christ, the disciples of Christ, and the Christian churches came from this union that kind of split apart into these three different groups, if that makes sense. So inside this Methodist movement, they had what they called a holiness movement. A holiness movement kind of led to the Nazarenes, a lot of your Church of God denominations, all these different groups, and they were basically, well, you could say like your full gospel, or your Pentecostal groups even came out of this. They were after the second blessing, and we'll kind of explain that here in a little bit. But there was this man named Charles Parham, and he lived from 1873 to 1929, so he only lived, what, like 56 years? He was what they called a holiness preacher, and he had a Bible college in Topeka, Kansas. William Seymour was a student of his, and because he was black, they wouldn't, this is what I was told, they wouldn't really let him be in the classroom. So he's outside the classroom, but he could hear Charles Parham teach. And so he took off for California in L.A., Los Angeles, and it was on Azusa Street. I've been there. It's what they call the Apostolic Faith Gospel Mission. I don't think it was much. It looked like they were in like on crates and stuff for seats and things of that nature, but just a little, I don't know, it might have been like a feed store or something. I can't remember. But it started in these people's home, and we went to this home, and it was up on a hill. It would have been really hard to get through, especially if you had any kind of disability of any kind. But anyway, this was in 1906. So we went to the 100-year celebration, and so in 2006, and my oldest son, my wife, and I all went out to L.A., and they had a conference out there, and there was some really good teachers that we sat under during this conference. Some of them were T.D. Jakes, Joyce Myers, Kenneth and Gloria Copeland, Benny Hinn, and there was a bunch of others. This has been, what, almost 15 years ago. I kind of forgot. But anyway, one of the ones that I found most interesting was a guy by the name of Father Francis McNutt. He was a Roman Catholic. He was one of the first Catholics involved in what they called the charismatic renewal, and in the practice of praying for healing in prayer and prayer groups. So let's talk about charismatic. Charismatic, according to Webster's dictionary, says designated or of a religious group that stresses direct divine inspiration manifested as in glossolalia, etc. So a lot of people refer to this as tongues. And glossolalia also in Webster's is defined as an uttering of unintelligible sounds as in a religious ecstasy. A charismatic movement was sparked in the 1960s. It went through all your mainstream denominations, including Roman Catholics, Episcopalians, and some others. In 1967, McNutt became acquainted with Agnes Sanford and Reverend Tommy Tyson. A long time ago, I was reading a book about Agnes Sanford, and I believe she was Episcopalian lay leader. I could be wrong there. It's been a long time. McNutt met with other Protestant leaders in the healing ministry and immediately realized that the basic teachings on healing were very much in line with the Roman Catholic tradition. Father McNutt has a BA from Harvard, an MFA from Catholic University of America, and a PhD from Aquinas Institute of Theology. He's ministered in Peru, Bolivia, Chile, and of course the United States. Super interesting man, him and his wife. And you might say, well, you know, I didn't know priests got married. He did, so I don't know how that works. But anyway, recently I saw a poll survey, and this really concerns me, and this is what I'm leading up to here. I saw that less than 30% of Americans attend a weekly religious service. And I take it that this is not only Christian, but we could be talking about Jewish, Muslim, everything else in America. Actually, they said 29%. So it tells me that 70% of Americans aren't into weekly worship, which is concerning. So in a way, this is a movement. I don't know. Anyway, I know that churches across the country are doing what they can do, you know. But it amounts to, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. So in church's case, you're looking at one soul at a time, you know. And I don't know if that's going to gain you back to where we need to be. Like I say, 30% of a nation, that's not a whole lot of people. It's concerning in my mind. But we do know that historically, a despotic government, which for despotic, another name for that is like a tyrant or absolute rule, where you put the power into like one person instead of like here in the United States. You know, if you've been watching TV at all, you got Congress and judicial, and you got the executive branch and all that. You don't have that in a despotic and tyrant government. But we do know, if you read the book of Revelations, that you do have what they call a beast and a false prophet. And this is that despotic rule. And a lot of times to do this, a lot of times to do this, they use crises, some kind of crises, either they invent it or just naturally there's a crisis going on, and then the population asks for their help. And so they'll give you the help, they squelch it, but then they're in control. Okay? So that's what we need to be looking at. And I really believe we need a religious movement in this country. We need some kind of revival. And I do want to read one verse to you, and then I got to get out of here. 2 Chronicles 7:14 says, if my people who are if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven and will forgive their sin and heal their land. Merry Christmas all. I got to get out of here. Bye.